So some people say that intermittent fasting is starvation, and that is a huge misconception. So it really is. Intermittent fasting just involves controlled periods of fasting and eating. Welcome back to the Aging Backward, Growing Forward podcast. In today's episode, we're going to discuss intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting has become a sensation all over the internet, amongst fitness enthusiasts, amongst nutrition people. I mean, you name it, people are talking about it. And I often get questions from clients of ours at our centers, just friends, family members, about this particular topic. So I want to dive in deep enough, but I don't want to get too far into the science where you guys start to glaze over and fall asleep. So I'll go deep enough that I think it'll make sense. And if you have any questions, of course, you could always send them in a DM or drop them in the comments. So what is intermittent fasting? So intermittent fasting, it's an eating pattern that alternates between periods of fasting and eating. And unlike traditional diets, primarily the focus on what foods you should be eating, intermittent fasting is more concerned with when you're eating. An example of intermittent fasting, let's say, is the 16-8 or the circadian. And I've mentioned these previously, but we'll go a little further on why those are so effective. And the 16-8, by the way, is 16 hours of fasting and then 8 hours of what they call the feeding window, right? The feeding window is when you're going to consume the foods and then you're going to stop. And I'll give you some tips, tricks, hacks, my own personal experience with all of this, by the way. Okay, so let's jump into it. So the science behind intermittent fasting, right? So it's based on insulin sensitivity, right? So well, when you eat, and especially foods that are high in carbohydrates, your body's going to release insulin to help transport your glucose from the bloodstream into the cells for energy or storage. So intermittent fasting can improve what's called the insulin sensitivity, and that makes it easier for the cells to take the glucose in. And this is really particularly relevant for people that have type 2 diabetes or at risk for type 2 diabetes. There's also a fat burning effect, right? So during the fasting periods, your insulin level drops, which prompts the body to start breaking down your fat for stored energy, and that leads to fat loss as well. And this is one reason why intermittent fasting is really popular amongst the weight management community. Again, another scientific benefit to fasting is autophagy. And again, you can Google all these words. We'll put them in the show notes also. And autophagy is it's triggered by fasting. So it's like your cellular cleanup mechanism, your body's cellular cleanup mechanism. The actual definition of autophagy is self-eating. So during autophagy, the cells clean out the damaged components and they recycle them for energy or repair. And this is associated with improved cellular health and longevity as well. There's also a hormone regulation component to intermittent fasting. So the hormone regulation is fasting can lead to changes in your hormones. For example, that human growth hormone, HGH, production can increase during fasting periods, which may have positive effects on fat loss and, of course, muscle preservation. I've got a lot of notes on this guy, so I got 2 pages of notes here to talk about that we did. So let's talk a little bit now about some misconceptions about intermittent fasting. So some people say that intermittent fasting is starvation, and that is a huge misconception. So it really is. Intermittent fasting just involves controlled periods of fasting and eating, and the emphasis is on the required nutrients during the eating windows. It's not about a severe calorie restriction or deprivation. So that's another method of caloric restriction, right? It is another method of people that they're trying to lose weight, and they say, okay, there's really only 2 ways to do this, right? You reduce your calories, caloric restriction, or you intermittent fast. And what you're doing is you're doing a sense of caloric restriction, but it's around the timing of the eating. So a lot of people get this confused. This happens in a lot of conversations we have. Isn't it the same thing? And aren't I going to consume the same amount of calories? The magic that happens in intermittent fasting is the fact that it is timed. So let's just use an example here. And again, we'll jump into a little bit of a rabbit hole on this one for a couple of minutes. So if you're going to eat 2,000 calories in a day, if you spread those 2,000 calories over, call it 15 hours, right? Let's just say your waking time. If you started at 8 in the morning and you kept eating all the way until, let's say 9 p.m. at night. If you took that same amount of calories and pushed them into a smaller 6 or 8 hour eating window, the same 2,000 calories, your body would actually you would have a much better fat burning effect and generally a weight loss effect if you did it in a intermittent fasting or a restricted time period. So, and regardless, let's take away the component of if you're exercising while you're doing this or when you're going to exercise. And by the way, I will touch on that because there's a lot of little things you do that you can do that could emphasize the benefits and exponentially improve the outcome of intermittent fasting. And by the way, just a qualifier here, intermittent fasting is not for everyone. And I always tell people before you start something like this, and I'll remind us again at the end of the show, before you start doing intermittent fasting, you should, of course, talk to a medical practitioner, someone hopefully that has an understanding of nutrition and eating and maybe sports nutrition. There's specific medical practitioners that do emphasize this area of their study. Not that a general practitioner doesn't know it, but this would be just better suited if you found someone that does that. That being said, you always want to talk to a medical provider before starting this, especially if you're a diabetic, type 2 diabetic, and any other health condition that you may have. So getting back into it, we're getting out of the rabbit hole now, okay? So there's some things people say, like skipping breakfast is harmful. If you're an intermittent faster, sometimes the first meal you wind up technically skipping is your first meal of the day. So let's break this up into a clock. Let's just break this to your 24-hour period. So let's just say that you're going to go to bed at 10 p.m. So the best way for an intermittent fasting math is to go 4 hours before you go to bed, you stop eating. Hopefully you sleep for 8 hours. And then 4 hours after you wake up, you can start eating again. So that would give you 16 hours fasted. So you're including your sleep time in your fasting period. So if you go back to your 4 hours prior, so if you go to bed at 10 p.m., back it up 4 hours, that's your last meal of the day. Let's just say you sleep for 8 hours, you wake up at 6 a.m., you wait 4 hours, your first meal would be 10 a.m. Now, if you go to bed at midnight, you just push it forward. Sleep for 8 hours, you wake up at 8, and let's just say you're 4 hours later, you're not going to have your first meal until noon. So you'd say, oh, well, that means I'm skipping breakfast, Eric. Well, technically, yes, you'd be skipping breakfast if breakfast is the first meal you have right when you wake up. So the idea here is to not eat right when you wake up. Now, that doesn't mean you do nothing. I would recommend you stay hydrated during this period. You drink a lot of water. Some fasters will say that even black coffee is fine or just an herbal tea. Hardcore fasting people are like, no, nothing, just water. If you're going to do just water, you can put some salt in there as well. There's also some other electrolytes that some people like to put in there. But again, a lot of these electrolytes are going to wind up having some type of sweetener in there. Even if it's not sugar, it's going to be something that's going to maybe potentially impact. So I would just say water with a little bit of salt is probably the most hardcore way to do it, just so you have a little bit of electrolytes. In the beginning of this, it is pretty difficult, right? I'm not going to lie. It's not the easiest thing to do, but you will get accustomed to it. So much so that you will enjoy it. You'll feel better. And we'll talk about some of those other benefits in a minute. So, you can eat whatever you want during the eating window. Well, while you're intermittent fasting, you hear that also. Can I just eat whatever I want if it's an eating window? Well, obviously it's much better to make good, nutritious, dense, high protein choices during your eating window. Again, understanding that if you ate Twinkies during that whole period and you intermittent fasted, you actually could lose weight. Now, you would not feel great. You probably wouldn't have a great amount of performance energy, but you could actually lose weight, which is going to lead me to a point that I just want to address now. If you're an intermittent faster, anyone who does any type of restriction on calories in any type of whatever format, whether it's caloric restriction or time restrictive eating, you will find that there's a high probability that you will lose muscle tissue. So we've got to be very cognizant of that if you're going to try this, because you don't want that to happen, because muscle is where all the magic happens, right? It's your fat burning machinery. It's actually what helps you get rid of and burn off all that glucose, right? When you're exercising and you're moving. So we want to always preserve muscle tissue. So when we're having the conversation with people that want to try caloric restriction in any format, we always want to make sure that you're taking in a high level of protein or a great essential amino acid product. And there's lots of them on the, that are out there. And again, We can add some links to stuff. We have a product that serotonin called Cerebolics. It's specifically just for this. It's for people that are in caloric deficits, and we give them essential amino acids because there's almost low to no calories in this powder that we put mix into your drink, and it's giving you all those essential aminos to protect that catabolization from happening. And that's what winds up happening. A lot of people that go on the medications, and we'll probably do a whole episode on that whole the semaglutide and tirzepatide and Wegovy and Ozempic. What they're essentially doing is creating a caloric restrictive environment for you. But what happens on several of these cases is people will lose lean body mass. So there's a preventative way to do that safely and effectively and keep your lean muscle mass. As a matter of fact, the effects are almost exponential when you do that because you're caloric restrictive. You've got more fat burning machinery. Remember, we call muscle fat burning machinery. So you want to really pay attention to your protein intake, as well as having maybe an amino acid supplement, an essential amino acid supplement available for yourself. So let's focus in a little bit on the fat loss part of this. So when you're intermittent fasting, it may promote fat loss more effectively, not just because of the caloric restriction, but it also can lead to some changes in your hormones levels, your metabolic processes that enhance fat burning. Well, during the fasting period, your insulin levels may drop, and it allows the body to tap into stored fat for energy. You've noticed I've mentioned insulin and insulin sensitivity and glucose in this conversation quite a bit, guys. That's intentional. Like understanding your A1C and your fasted glucose. These are numbers that you can get a blood test on, and you should know your starting value, because when you start doing something like this, you want to see, has this improved those numbers in my blood work, in my labs, because the labs don't lie, as I like to say. So before starting something like this, let's make a clear point. You should get some blood work done if you haven't. And I've said this on episodes previously, and I'm going to continually say, because I think it's so important. It's a point I always want to hammer home. Get some blood work and look at A1C, your fasted glucose, and understand what each of those values mean to you today. You may also find that you are in a dangerous level. You might be borderline type 2 or pre-diabetic, and you really want to get ahead of that. This could be a way that could actually quickly change the direction of the path you are on. Intermittent fasting is a way that could be very effective means to helping you do that. So continuing on, so the fat loss, again, is also benefited from the preservation of that lean muscle mass. So you really have to pay attention to managing muscle mass, because that will improve your fat loss. So the one thing I will caution is whenever you're doing caloric restricting, please try to resistance train workout, because people think, oh gosh, how am I going to get my work in? I'm an AM exerciser. I wake up and I work out. Usually that's how I do it, or I have my breakfast, then I work out. Completely understand that, and you may have to switch around when you train. My personal experience has been, I kept my training in the morning and I train fasted now. And I love it. And I never would have done that years ago. I would have been like, you're crazy. You got to have carbohydrates right before you work out. You need that energy and yada, yada. And then as I started to educate myself on the science behind what's actually happening, I realized that intermittent fasting is fine. And exercising while you're fasted is also fine, provided that you taken the right nutrition after your post-workout. So I'm going to throw another term out here that's important, because what happens here is it's called mTOR suppression, right? So it's the mechanical target of rapamycin, that's mTOR. And there's a fine balance of mTOR suppression that you want to understand. And that's a whole anti-aging thing as well. But it is really important to understand what happens when you do your first feeding, right? And you want to get those amino acids in your body. Because again, if you're exercising for muscle mass, or you're listening and you're someone who trains because you want to put on some size and muscle, you never want to put on like just weight, right? No one wants to work out and just get fat or bigger, and some of it's fat and some of it's muscle. Everyone's trying to just put on lean body mass. So I always aim to inform people that ask me these questions about, okay, how can I give you the safest, effective lean body mass gains and reduce body fat? So training fasted has been incredibly effective for me. My energy, the first couple of workouts, don't get me wrong, it's tough. Like, you're not used to it. You got to be really super hydrated. Make sure you're paying attention to your workout. You may have to do a 50% your first time or two. But once you've done it for a week or two, your exercising while you're fasted will be like, you probably won't even be able to do a breakfast before working out ever again if you've done it in the past, because it's incredible. Like your energy is there. You've got enough energy to get through it. I promise you that. The first couple of workouts, you're going to have to motivate yourself because you're not accustomed to that process. But now I got to tell you, I do my personal regimen. I wake up, I do my fasted exercising, whether it's cardio, resistance training, HIIT workout, whatever my modality is for that workout. I sauna after that, right? So then I go another leg up. And again, everything I'm telling you, this is iterated over many months into what I'm capable of doing on a daily basis. So take this one step at a time, right? Start with one thing, iterate to the next thing I'm talking about here. So I'm fasted. I'll do my resistance training workout. I'll do my post-workout sauna. And then after that, I'll let my body cool down. Maybe you're going to do some grounding work or whatever other, there's all sorts of great things you can continue to do, like post-workout. Then I quote unquote break my fast. I do it with, a coffee shake, I call it. So it's got coffee, it's got it's got collagen protein, it's got, some whey protein in there as well. There's mushroom elixirs in there. There's MCT oil for energy. I keep the shake, but there's no carbohydrates. I don't put any sugar in my particular shake for me because, again, I have issues where, I've got to pay attention to my A1C and glucose. It's just genetics, right? So you've got to manage it. But it has really done wonders for me. So post-workout, when my mTOR is really, really suppressed, and I just flush it all, those amino acids in, those proteins in, and it's been really good for me to maintain lean body mass. My strength is better than it's ever been. My body fat percentage is lower than it's ever been, and I'm just keeping muscle. And at 49 years old, that's not an easy task to do. So I will tell you that this stuff works if you do it based on your pace, right? So take your time, adding all of these little nuances and getting used to, and again, give it 6 weeks. Give it 12 weeks, whatever it is. You give it a couple of months though and try it. Don't just give it 2 weeks and quit, because you're not going to see any of the results we're talking about. And another thing you'd want to know is you'd also want to know your current lean body mass versus body fat. And that you'd have to do. You can't get that from a scale, right? So maybe you do it on an in-body scanner or a DEXA scan like Donnie and I talked about on our last episode. So understanding what's happening on that scale. So just weighing yourself is not the most accurate way. If you don't have any of those tools like a DEXA scan or an in-body scan, how your clothes fit is a very good indicator, right? Is your waist size shrinking? Is the areas that were, gooey and squishy, are those decreasing so that you can eyeball yourself in the mirror? Of course, that is always the test of truth. But I like to get the data points, right? So I do an in-body scan myself personally. So one of the other great benefits of intermittent fasting is a reduction in inflammation. We're going to do a whole episode on inflammation, by the way, because I will jump in this rabbit hole and stay there for another hour. So I'm going to try to just touch on this, and we'll do a whole episode on inflammation because there's some amazing tools to manage inflammation. And so many of us suffer from inflammation, and then the chronic inflammation is associated with obesity, Met syndrome. Some studies suggest that intermittent fasting could reduce the inflammation markers and improve your metabolic health. So one of the obvious ones is if you're reducing your carbohydrates, reducing your sugars, which is a tremendous driver in inflammation in our bodies, that alone is you can figure out that one, right? It's going to help. But the benefit I personally experienced from this was unbelievable. And as I was training, as I was getting older, and it was taking me a little longer to recover, I was more sore every morning when I woke up. Some of you listening to this may be like, oh, that sounds like me. It takes me a couple of seconds to get out of bed. And when I start my first couple of steps out of bed, I was like, everything was like kind of like hurting or creaking, and it didn't feel great. When I started to intermittent fast, it forced me to reduce, sugar regardless, because I was not taking in carbohydrates throughout the day. I was minimizing to a short period of time, realizing that if I optimize my feeding window with better foods that weren't, inflammatory type foods, carbohydrates, sugar, stuff that's, crappy on the glycemic index, for example, it really reduced my inflammation. And almost everyone I've ever talked to, that's a byproduct that they're like, oh yeah, I feel better. Like everything moves around well. Younger people listening to this, you may not be experiencing this yet, but I promise you will experience this as you get older. So you want to start managing it now so you don't, right? These are all the benefits of all these anti-aging hacks. And it is, by the way, intermittent fasting is a very sustainable way to manage weight loss. It's not something that you have to, do and don't do. And another question that I often get is, can I stop intermittent fasting on the weekends? And, what about if I only do it 4 or 5 days a week and 3 days I don't? I kind of throw that crap out the window. Like if that's what you want to do, fine. But you're defeating the whole purpose of what your ultimate goal is. Like you're fighting your goal. Listen, if you're intermittent fasting, it is infinitely easier to stay fasting 7 days a week because you're going to just keep having to restart the process, and you're going to it's going to throw you off. Now, are there going to be times you have to go to a wedding, or you've got an event, or maybe you've got a brunch you got to go to, whatever it is that you're going to have to shift around the times. Work with it. Doesn't mean you have to do a 16-8 every single time. Sometimes I just do 14 hours fasted. Sometimes I do 18 hours just because life made it 18 hours. Sometimes I do the circadian fast. It's 12 or 13 hours. The sun up to sundown fast is the circadian fast. So you don't have to be so regimented around that, but I would say stick to it every day. There are going to be things in your lifestyle things that are going to change the times you're doing, but just move the clock hands, right? That's what I just say is move the 4 hours either way, based on what happened in your life that particular day. But I will tell you, it's harder to start and stop. Like if you just go back to eating all the time, and your results will certainly be affected. And a lot of the benefits that occur that we had mentioned earlier, you may not really see them. The inflammation benefits, the hormone benefits. I mean, there's just a couple of things that you want to have it sustained. So at least in the beginning, until you really get to maybe your goal, maintain the fasting as best you can 7 days a week. That's my suggestion to you. Do what you want with that. So I made a list of some of the questions that we commonly get at my anti-aging centers, that I get from friends and family, people I interact with about intermittent fasting. So the one I get the most is can intermittent fasting be combined with other dietary approaches such as keto or a vegan diet for enhanced results? So yeah, I mean, during the feeding window, from my own experience and from those that have been very successful that I've talked to about this, if you happen to do better on a ketogenic type diet, or you're a vegan route, you're taking that same type of foods. I'd say when you have these categories of ketogenic, so you're going higher fat, no or low, very low carbohydrate and protein. I find the one thing that I do want to emphasize is protein intake, because you don't want to lose muscle mass. So regardless of the type of current program, what you could do. I mean, if you're on one of the paleo diet or a keto diet or whatever it is, the Mediterranean diet, whatever's working for you that you're enjoying, wonderful, but just keep it in the feeding window. And that's really the whole key to success with intermittent fasting, is staying inside the feeding window. Do I believe that there are some benefits to certain diets that are more nutrition dense and higher in protein? Yes, because it is definitely known that when people go into any type of caloric restriction environment, even though it's time restriction, the tendency for you to lose muscle is just there, especially if you're an active exerciser. You have to make sure you're still getting that quality protein. And you may ask this question, because I get it often as well: how much protein should I be taking in? For most people, it's 0.8 grams to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. And as you're exercising, if you're a really intense exerciser, you want to even bump that up a little more. And again, it doesn't mean you adding all these additional calories, because remember, you're reducing your carbohydrates. You just want to make sure the key thing on your plate is you're taking in your protein, especially if your goal is to maintain lean body mass. Now, if your goal is just to lose weight, because you have a really, really high BMI, you're in the obese category, well then, yeah, you have to lose weight at all costs. You've got to get those calories cut back. But when you're exercising and you're resistance training, you want to maintain that lean body mass. So protein intake should be your focus. So the next question is, how does intermittent fasting affect my energy levels, mental clarity, and overall well-being? That is one of the great benefits that I didn't even touch on in the whole conversation. One area where a lot of people say the first thing they notice is that mental clarity. Brain fog is a huge thing right now. I mean, and I can give you a litany of reasons why I think it's an issue. I believe it has a lot to do with inflammation, due to the amount of sugar that most of the American diet has in it currently. So the people that the clarity thing, and that's one of the things I noticed, by the way, and I figured it out. I noticed I was sharper in communication, which is it's an odd place for most people. I was really attentive to how I was speaking to other people, and my attentiveness, my alertness, my responsiveness and communication. But people say it all the time. When I wake up in the morning, I just feel better. When I'm reading, when I'm watching something, I'm more engaged. Like it's unbelievable, like how that cloud lifts, if you will, for people that are intermittent fasters. So another key factor there is your energy levels. Believe it or not, even though you may think that, oh God, I'm going to be dragging butt the first couple hours of my day, you're not. Or you might think, oh, I'm going to be dragging butt at, the last couple hours of my day. You're absolutely not. And remember, another benefit that ties back to sleep, and we have an excellent episode on sleep coming for you, is when you restrict your calories and you stop eating 4 hours before bedtime, it's also going to improve your sleep quality. So this stuff is all compounding. So everything I'm talking about here, guys, you build on, make building blocks out of this, and it all will tie together. So the habits you're creating, they fit like a puzzle for your overall health and longevity. And again, just to touch on one of the last questions is, how does it affect my physical performance? When I'm working out, in the beginning, yes, like I mentioned, it's going to affect it the first workout or two. I assure you, though, by week 2 or 3 of intermittent fasting, you will be flying through your workouts like you always did. In fact, you might even feel a little more energized, and just know that as you're doing those workouts, the benefits you're pushing out for improving on your lean body mass and your fat loss, you're accelerating it, your insulin sensitivity is improving. All of these wonderful things are happening in your body. So continue to exercise with that same intensity that you've always done, and know that if the first workout or two, it might not be perfect. I assure you, it's going to be amazing. That's from personal experience. Like I've done this. I have so many friends and so people that I know that are exercisers that now do this format. There's not one size shoe that fits for everyone here. That's for sure. But I will tell you that intermittent fasting has been really effective to get people on a plan. Right? It's easier to manage. Intermittent fasting is easier to manage than sometimes when people go on, just diets, or they're trying to follow, specific menus. When we talk to people and clients of ours about managing, their nutrition and their food intake, it's really easy to talk to them about macros and be very specific. When we can get them to agree to eat within a specific feeding window, it's really helpful because we're controlling the calories that way. It's easier to control calories in a shorter window of 8 hours than it is to control them over 12 or sometimes 16 hours for some people. And you don't manage to overconsume. The biggest challenge that people have with eating is it's overconsumption. It's when you're eating. You're eating in the pantry at night. You're sitting on the couch. You grab a bowl of something, or a bag of potato chips, or whatever it is. It's just these little bad habits that happen because you're there. It's just your behaviors, right? So if we can just fix those behaviors, intermittent fasting gives you the guardrails to fix behavior. So I'm a big fan of it for a litany of reasons. I didn't want to get too much in the weeds. You can dive really deep on the science of why some of this stuff really works well for the human body. But I will tell you that try it. It doesn't hurt to try it. And if you're going to try it, give it a good period of time. Give it 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks. Give it enough time so you can start seeing results. Like any program, anything you're going to do, give it enough time to see if you can get the results that you're trying to achieve. And you tweak it along the way. I tweaked mine over and over. I iterated when I would start my fast, when I would end my fast, based on my bedtime. How do I do my weekend fasting? When I travel, what do I do then? You have to plan. But again, like I've said over and over again, you're going to continually hear me say this. This is your health. You need to take a little bit of time, and you need to take the effort and give the effort and get disciplined about it. And once you get that discipline in place, it's effortless. So make it a habit, because it's a discipline of yours and you have a goal. And every time you think about kicking the can and jumping off, and not doing it anymore, think about the goal. Say, hey, I've got a goal. I want to do this. And think about your long-term goals as well, right? Your health, your longevity, your health span, not just in the moment. Yeah, you might lose a few pounds, 10 pounds, 8 pounds, 12 pounds, whatever it might be, if that's your goal. Or you just might want to drop your body fat percentage and increase your lean body mass. Hopefully that is what the goal is going to be. And I don't think intermittent fasting is the flavor of the week. I believe intermittent fasting is something that I'm happy is getting popular. It's been around. I mean, people have been doing this. This isn't something new. It's just getting popular now. But I think if it's done safely and it's qualified and it works for you inside of your goals, then it is a great tool to have in your toolbox. It's not the end all be all. It's not the only one. There's so many other ways to improve your body composition. But intermittent fasting has seemingly been very beneficial for not just improving body composition, but all the other things we talked about. So I hope you got some great value out of this episode. You took notes, you got those nuggets that I tell you to search for when you're listening to and watching podcasts. We'll continue to try to deliver great value and information that you're asking for and looking for when it comes to your health span, your lifespan, and your overall performance. So I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of Aging Backward and Growing Forward. And thanks for joining us for this episode.